welcome to this webinar on applying HCV approach at landscape scale from screening to protection. My name is Leonie Aurora. I'm the Landscape and Partnerships Lead for the Tropical Forest Alliance, and on behalf of CFA and HCV Network, for the co-organizers of this webinar, we would like to welcome you to this webinar, applying HCV approach at landscape scale from screening to protection. This webinar is organized to serve the Jurisdictional Action Network. This is a forum of proponents that aim to raise the profile of the good work that's being done at landscape and jurisdictional scale to achieve sustainable land use at landscape and jurisdictional scale, and also to exchange lessons. And as the HCV approach is the bedrock for many certification systems and is known across agricultural supply chains and commodities, and as more and more companies are engaged at landscape and jurisdictional scale, so beyond their supply chain at landscape scale, there have been a lot of requests from companies and also landscape implementers to understand a bit more on how to use the HCV approach at landscape and jurisdictional scale. So thus this webinar. So the objectives of this webinar is to build understanding on the use of the HCV approach and screening to inform development of landscape and jurisdictional initiatives, and also to inform you about upcoming guidance and tools to complement HCV screening and apply this approach. And as the idea is to build understanding, please do not hesitate to send in your questions. You can use either the Q&A or also the chat box. Just post your questions as we go along. We will have a short Q&A session, but please put in your questions as we go along. And to help us build this understanding and inform all of us, we have a panel of great speakers. We have Neff Kemp, Landscapes Lead at HCV Network, who will tell us about HCV Network itself, the HCV screening, and upcoming guidance on the use of HCV approach at landscape scale. We also have Ellen Baidije, the Senior Project Manager at ProForest. She will speak about how ProForest has applied HCV approach in Magasina municipality. This is part of the Grand Bam landscape in Cameroon. And we also have Stefan Hitzbichler, Advisor for Sustainability and Agriculture Supply Chain at GIZ, on the use of HCV's approach to assess land use planning in Kapuasulu district in West Kalimantan. So without further ado, I will hand over to Neff to introduce HCV Network. And just a kind reminder to everyone, please put in your questions, any questions you may have on the chat or Q&A box. Neff, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much, Leonie. So basically, I'm going to start by introducing the HCV network to those who may not be familiar, and then basically say why we're working in the landscape space. Next slide. So we are next slide, please. We're an organization of 32 organizations, and the network supports a secretariat. We are currently with 15 staff. So there are non-profit organizations, producers and supply companies. Standards are also members of the network, and technical service providers as well, who do a lot of the assessments, the HCV assessments in the field. Next slide. So just a very quick recap on the HCV approach. There'll be some resources which you can click on in the chat. But basically, the HCV approach is a 20-year plus methodology, first used in the Forest Stewardship Council. The systems. The process or the approach is to identify specific and significant and critical values, identify threats to those values, provide recommendations for their management, and ultimately monitor an enhancement for long protection. It's the HCV approach in a nutshell. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. So just a very quick recap. Our first is next is landscape level. The next is ecosystem and habitats, HCV3. HCV4 is ecosystem services, and number 5 is community needs, and HCV6 is centered around cultural values. Now, the HCV approach itself is now required by 22 different voluntary standards, and as well as the certifications and environmental policies for financial institutions, and also the many multinational organizations such as USA, GIZ, and the GEF use the approach. So HCV, or traditionally HCV, has been used in the management unit scale around companies or groups of smallholders who are producing commodities. So it's been used on a relatively restricted scale. Now, there's an increasing need for landscapes and jurisdictional HCVs. We have continued loss of natural ecosystems, loss of biodiversity, threatening economies, livelihoods, food security, health, and quality of life. So there are also exacerbating increased impacts from climate change. What's needed is a transformative change at scale, with decisive actions targeting priority areas where the risks are highest. And so the HCV approach has been scaled to the landscape to provide solutions where we can think about acting locally and contribute to global sustainability targets. Next slide. Right, and finally, I just want to introduce the HCV screening. Again, the resources will be put in the chat, and you can look at the screening guide online. It's a 6-step process which is used to categorize environment. It considers the likelihood or probability of HCV presence in that territory, and then what threatens them. And then by overlaying those two data sets, we identify areas most at risk for prioritized follow-up and action. So the screening idea, where we need to do work most of all, but also identifies gaps, sparks stakeholder discussions, and long-term sustainability. We are looking at how to develop initial strategies for HCV protection through this screening approach. It's high-level, large-scale desktop analysis at relatively low cost, and it has been applied over 60 million hectares, 9 countries, and within the spatial planning, jurisdictional certification, and risk analysis. And you'll hand straight to Helen, who will introduce and explain an example of screening carried out in Cameroon.
Great, thank you, Nev. So thank you. So yes, I'm Hélène Baidije. I'm a senior project manager working for Proforest. And before I start, just to let you know, Proforest is a technical service provider and not-for-profit organization with about 20 years experience in supporting agriculture and forestry production and sourcing, aiming to deliver positive outcomes for people, nature, and climate. So we work by supporting companies, governments, and local communities to make transition to responsible sourcing and production. And we work within and beyond supply chain, as we think this is how to drive long-lasting change. We've been advocating for partnership, collaboration, and knowledge sharing. And that's a bit what we're going to do today by sharing a bit of an example of how we've been using some of the tools and approaches. As Nev said, we are a member of the HCV network, and we've been there since its beginning. We continue to use and implement the HCV approach in our work through assessments, whether it is for certification, as again Nev mentioned, through training and guidance development, and we've been supporting also innovation and adaptation of the tool. So of the context of the HCV concept to new context. So for example, for smallholders, or in this case, for landscape. Okay, good. Thank you. So we can go to next slide, please. So today, what I'm going to present is one of the case study of how we've been using the HCV screening for specifically as part of a landscape level program. But just to let you know, we've been also using, since the beginning of the guidance in 2019, we've been using the HCV screening and the approach at landscape level in different parts of the world. In Africa, more specifically, it's really like in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Cameroon, we've been using it as part of existing or ongoing landscape initiatives, and this to inform the development of land use and management and investment plans. So now let me bring you to an overview of the landscape we're going to look at today. So the landscape is Bangassina municipality. It's a municipality located in the central province of Cameroon, in the Grambam landscape at in two different departments, Mbamenki and Bamani-Nobu, which is a transition zone between forest and savanna, and it's about 80,000 hectares. So why this municipality was chosen? Actually, this was chosen as a pilot municipality as part of a broader landscape program. As I said, this landscape is called Green Commodity Landscape Program, and it's co-convened by WWH and IDH. The program aims to support sustainable commodity production, to reduce deforestation, so contributes to forest protection and improving the livelihoods of farmers and their community. And here, specifically in Bangassina, it's using a cocoa production as an entry point to the landscape. Indeed, in Bangassina, there's about 70% of livelihoods of the communities coming from cocoa production. So how was the HCV approach integrated? Well, first we did a screening of the whole municipality. Then through the prioritization, a more in-depth assessment was done in the northeast part of the municipality. And then some capacity building in participatory mapping, but also understanding better the HCV HCS for farmers is ongoing. The screening objectives were really to first identify potential values that would merit conservation, and also the threats to those values, and this to identify priorities for next step of the development of the land use plan. So we've done indicative HCV mapping, threat assessment, and consultations with local community members and national experts. And all this was overall, as I said, to give some recommendation to inform the development of the land use plan for the municipality. So now let's zoom in and get more into what did we do really during this screening. First, I think one important thing to understand is that in those type of assessments, which are quite large scale, we will rely a lot on secondary data before going even into the field. So getting good, reliable secondary data is important. Here we have an example of a land cover classification that was done by a third party. If you can click another time, please, Jack. Yes, just to show, I think from this land cover classification and through consultations of communities, we already knew that there were some inaccuracies, and this would have influence on the long term also for some of our recommendations for HCV 1, 3, and 4. Basically, our map was a bit conservative. Here you see quite some forest, but as I said, this is a cocoa production landscape, and a lot of the cocoa is actually cocoa under shade. So cocoa done into agroforestry system or under degraded forest. So this is something we've been able to identify better once we got on the field to consult some of the communities. Next slide, please. And one after. Other information we tried to look at was looking at global or national data sets, and we see first, well, for some of the information on HCV1 and biodiversity and species, there is obviously the IUCN data that we can find. In Cameroon, we have the chance that there is actually a national Forest Atlas of Cameroon, which was done in partnership with Ministry of Environment and Forest, I think, and the WRI. So you can find some information about land tenure, some concession data, some forest or protected community forest areas, for example. And then for HCV 5 and 6, which are obviously more complicated to map, especially remotely, we still try to look into reports, or here we have a communal development plan, which was done a few years ago, which actually had some example of participatory mapping was done for HCV6, so cultural areas and cultural sites were mapped, and also it helped us understand a bit better the socio-economic context of the area. Next slide, please. So on top of that, we also tried to look into national interpretations of HCV. So a lot of countries have their own definitions or national interpretation of HCVs, and it's quite relevant to understand better what are the criteria that are relevant for the national context. Next slide, please. And based on this, we are then able to do those probability matrices, as we say, which are, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but here we see there are different criteria that can be fed us in one HCV, and then gives us indication on what type of indicators and data source we can use and what proxies we can use to determine likelihood of presence, likelihood somewhat likely or not likely. So if you go to the next slide, we also, as I said, tried to consult some national experts. And here we have, for example, experts that could tell us that, yes, you can have some idea of you can have protected areas, but actually it's not very relevant in this context. Or you might need to look at some other features of the landscape. So here, for example, relevant for HCV3, they mentioned some presence of floodplain forest or swamp forest. So this was really how to gather information to be able to do then our mapping. And you can go to the next slide, where we can see an example of how we've done looking at areas for forest-dependent species. So if you click back again twice, we have on the other side, we have example of probably presence of, you can go to the map, of forest-dependent species that could be potentially there. So we map their area with more good forest, primary forest, secondary degraded forest, and then an area without forest. And then if you click again, we can see areas on the other side, as I said, for savanna species, where that we also map, and here an example of some casella that could be found in the landscape. So overall, when we overlay the two maps, we're able to see where are potential HCV ones. Then we looked also, as I said, to the threats in the landscape. We mostly looked at this through secondary data and reports, but some of the consultation of communities helps us as well to look into what are the potentially threats. You can go to the next slide, please. And also understanding the underlying drivers, which is relevant when you're thinking about plans for management and monitoring of those threats. So again, we did the same exercise, trying to find some proxies of where those threats could be found. And then you can go to the next slide where you can see the map, results of the maps here, threats of unsustainable use of resource on some of the forest near villages. We can go to the next slide. Then we needed to prioritize. So to do that, we classified the ecosystem and then HCV under each ecosystem. And then if you go to the next slide, we can see how we did the prioritization with looking at threats and threat levels. So the threat level was determined looking at the severity of the scale and the scale of the threats to the HCVs. And then with this, again, if you can go to the next slide, another exercise of mapping, we overlaid where are the threats, where are the HCVs, here HCV1, and then we can identify one of the zone you can see in red in the next click. Yes, thank you. So now we can go to the last slide. So based on this, what was done and what's the result of this screening? So based on this, we identified a more other area to do more in-depth study, especially in this zone where we thought it was forest, but probably less than expected. So more flora assessment was done, and then the result of the assessment was integrated in the sustainable development plan of the municipality, which we learned recently that was validated. So there's a plan to now protect about 5,000 of the identified potential HCVs in the area by 2026. And there's also some discussions in plan with cocoa companies that are sourcing from the landscape to give some capacity to local farmers to identify and conserve some of the HCVs identified. So I think that's all. Thank you very much. And I think if you want to know more about the case studies, Jack would have put the more information in the chat. And just to let you know, also we've been co-developing with the HCVN training on protecting HCVs in landscape, so you could, which is accessible and public for all. Thank you. So now I will hand over to Stefan.
Yeah, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today my pleasure to present you the case study about HCV screening and assessment from Kapuas Hulu district in Indonesia. As Leonie introduced myself, my name is Stefan Kitzbichler. I'm an advisor for GIZ in the project Sustainability and Value Added in Agricultural Supply Chains, and I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia. Okay. Yeah, next please. So the rundown of my presentation today is, first I will give you a bit of an introduction and background, then I will present the results of our HCV HCS assessment in Kapuas Hulu, and then concluding with an outlook on the challenges and the strategic follow-up. So the background is that no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation, or NDBE policy is becoming an increasingly important sourcing consideration in global agricultural supply chains. Context climate change discourse. However, Indonesia has a peculiar distinction between protected state forest and agricultural land. APL. The ministerial authority over a particular area of land is determined by this. So, for example, the district government has only authority over APL, not over the state forest, which is under the ministry. Yeah. Delineation, however, is not always congruent. So you may find forest which is in APL, or you can also find forest zonation where there are actually no trees anymore, or never been. And so, however, Papua Zulu is a forest frontier, so it is quite common that you find quite a lot of forest still in APL. And this was also a bit of a background why we did this study in Papua Zulu. This defiant definition of deforestation. Wait, can you go back? I'm not finished this one. Yeah, the defiant definition of deforestation in Indonesia that was outlined above is interesting in the international context. For example, with this new upcoming EU regulation on deforestation-free origin, because in Indonesia, if you cut down trees in APL, it's not necessarily deforestation, while in international definition, of course, it would be. Yeah. Okay, next, please. So the project, the location of Papua Zulu is a district in the heart of Borneo. The size is about 31,000 square kilometers. For comparison, it's about the size of Belgium. Population is 263,000. The main commodities are natural rubber and oil palm. In 2003, Papua Zulu declared itself a conservation district. And finally, in 2018, it became a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is a model region for sustainable development. For the land zonation in Papua Zulu, you can see that only about 24% are other use areas, or APL, which is under the authority of the district government. The rest is national park, protected forest, production forest, which is all under ministerial authority, not under the district authority. Yeah, next one. Can you proceed to the next slide, please?
Stefan, we're on the part about the GIS support just now.
Oh, it didn't switch for me.
Yeah, maybe you're breaking up also a little bit, maybe. Oh, I think we lost.
Okay, I was just interrupted. I think I'm back now. Yeah.
Okay, maybe if you want to turn off your video because your voice sometimes break also a little bit. That's also fine.
Okay, I'll turn off. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the support for Papua Zulu through GIZ, which is just a selection, not exhaustive. However, GIZ has been present in Papua Zulu since 2009 and has been accompanying this district on its sustainability journey ever since. There has been a series of projects, and however, the focus has been gradually switching from the forestry angle increasingly to the agricultural interest. In 2019, GIZ commissioned a jurisdictional HCV HCS screening, which was conducted by the HCV Network. There was the handicap that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not possible to do any field verification. Then in 21 to 22, we commissioned a jurisdictional HCV HCS assessment, which was carried out by IPB University in Bogor. Yeah, next one. Okay, now I'm gonna present you the results of this jurisdictional HCV assessment I just mentioned. It was conducted in 21 to 22. Yeah, next. So the purpose of this assessment was to get a detailed analysis of HCV and HCS areas, and also about no-go areas. Then about land suitability analysis with the focus on natural rubber and oil palm commodities. Then an analysis of land cover changes and land cover projections, as well as development of a management and monitoring strategy, particularly for the other use areas. Next. The methodology, the basis was the guidelines for HCV identification and the HCS approach toolkit. And concerning the data compilation, it was building on this HCV HCS screening that was conducted by the HCV network, complemented by primary data collection in the field, including surveys, interviews, and focus group discussions, with application of free prior informed consent. Thank you. And the result of the assessment on a high level was that about 91% of the district are HCV, and about almost 85% are HCS, as you can see to the right. So the process flow for this HCV HCS management and monitoring strategy was, as you can see on the left. So from the indicative HCV HCS results, go, no-go areas were defined. So concerning this no-go, go, no-go areas, you can see this infographic towards the right. So we have a spectrum from protection to cultivation. So protection is no-go priority 1, which means natural forest. Priority 2 is degraded forest. Priority 3 is converted forest, and go area is non-forest area or non-HCV, non-HCS. And once these go, no-go areas were defined, they were overlaid with the spatial plan, with the land cover, with the land suitability, with the biosphere reserve zonation, and the land cover change projection, and then came up with a management and monitoring strategy. And then under consideration of economic and social aspects, conservation, restoration, and sustainable production recommendations were defined for the district. Yeah, next. So this is the result of this HCV HCS management strategy. So about 57% of the district are recommended for conservation. 49% are recommended for sustainable production, and about 2% of the area are defined for restoration. Yeah, next. So what were important factors for this jurisdictional HCV HCS assessment? One is, as pointed out by Helen before, accurate and robust data, secondary data. And also to have the buy-in from the stakeholders, meaning the local government, civil society, and companies. So we assured this through a series before we started the assessment by socializing about this study. Then once we had the preliminary results, we conducted a verification workshop. And once we had the final results, they were presented in a public consultation event. Yeah, next. So, and how useful was actually the HCV HCS screening from 2019 for the HCV HCS assessment that we have done just now? So there was, can you click so that the text will pop up?
The text is already up there, Stefan.
Yeah, well, I have a delay on my end. Okay. So that was very useful to get preliminary results to set sampling locations in the field. So overlay the screening results with the land use. And then secondary data that was used in the screening was also used in the assessment. Thus, we had improved efficiency. And there was a narrow gap between screening and the assessment. Those gaps became targets for ground checking to confirm the final HCV HCS assessment results. Okay. Are you already on the next slide?
Yes, Stefan.
Okay, I just so now we are in chapter 3, yeah? Where I just present to you the challenges and the strategic follow-up. So
can you go to the next slide, please? yes, we are on the challenges and strategic follow-up.
Yeah, now it has synced on my end also. So the challenges, we have, one of the challenges is to have a coordinated approach between the stakeholders, public, private, and civil, in the jurisdiction. However, multi-stakeholder platform establishment is a long-term process. One of the recommendations in the study was to conduct a land swap between forest areas in APR with already deforested forest donation. However, that is a risky strategy, and we are still not yet fully decided whether we will promote this to the local government. And besides land use planning, which is a highly political process, we also pursue alternative approaches such as collaboration with concessions and social forestry. And the strategic follow-up for these three points that I just mentioned is that we support the land use planning, because KwaZulu is currently in the review process of its spatial plan. And so we would like to promote the results that we have from this HCV, HCS assessment. So to have jurisdictional arrangements for HCV and HCS through regional policies to enable proper management. And we have two other challenges, which is HCV, HCS in other use areas or APR. This area is under the agricultural agency. However, for them, it is still largely a new topic, and there's still not really a clear regulation on the management of HCV, HCS in APR, because so far HCV, HCS has been largely dominated by the forestry sector. However, the forestry sector is authority is on the state forest and not on the other use areas. And another challenge is that some of those identified HCV, HCS areas, including peat areas, are partly already dedicated as concessions. For this, we have to admit that the details are uncertain because concession data is confidential in Indonesia and not publicly available. We have tried to strategic follow-up for these two challenges is to conduct capacity building about HCV, HCS sensitive planning and management for stakeholders, in particularly for the agricultural agency. Yeah, thank you. That was my last slide.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. Nev, would you go ahead with
Sure.
the...
Yeah, I apologize for my connection. Hopefully you can all hear me well now.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Next slide. So what I want to do now is try and explain about where we envisage the landscape approach being utilized at a so the HCV approach being utilized at a landscape scale. Okay, so the screening guidance has already been out. It's been in circulation. It's been used by various stakeholders for the last 3 years, and you've just had two examples, one from Cameroon, one from KwaZulu and in West Kalimantan. And so I want to kind of outline where we see we go from now. Next slide, please. So we're envisaging a landscape package, HCV landscape package, where we see there are main steps or phases in applying HCVs at landscape scales. There are resources or guidance that are required for each of those phases. And importantly, there are numerous claims which can be made by stakeholders within the landscape. So we see the first stage is the HCV screening, and this obviously you've just had two examples. But in order to scale this up, we hope that these maps that are being produced can be provided so that you don't have to repeat them. So a resource base or a database of resource maps will be very useful. And also we have training. We've now got an online training course, which hopefully you can have in the chat as well. You can have a look at for that training. And if when you've done the initial screening, you can claim that your area, for instance, your supply chain comes from a low or a high risk area, because the result of screening is probability and threats, and ultimately potential risk to high conservation values. Now, the second part of this is filling gaps, and where we see. So go on to the next slide, please. So I just want to back up. So the screening also obviously gives you this insight to what you're going to do, but we've noticed there's a lot of variability. Okay, so next slide. Now, when we come on to the second phase, which is filling gaps, we're looking at issues of data quality, and also we have to have plans to address limitations. There's been several notes in the chat about how do we cope with looking at social data for HCV5 and 6 and potentially for 4 as well. And we have to have plans to address data limitation. So that must be run in process. At the moment, there is not very much guidance about how to do a data quality evaluation. This is something that we're designing, and also how to address limitation of data. What do you do if there is no data or limited data, for say for HCV5? Do you plan, or the screening can help you plan on areas where it's most likely needed, or you can limit your claims to how you can use the HCV screening and use the precautionary approach. So you might be in a very low risk area for HCV 1 to 4, but you use the precautionary approach to say because you didn't have the data, HCV 5 and 6 are precautionally high. Go on to the next one. Now, so the third stage we're looking at is possibly one of the most interesting, and there's also been some comments in the chat. It's about what decisions can we make from the results once we've got a good screening, we've filled gaps as much as possible, or we've created caveats and limitations on the scope and the use of the screening. What actually happens when we have these high, medium, and low risk areas, as you've seen in a couple of presentations? What we're suggesting is that in areas of high risk, where there's a high probability of HCVs being present, and those HCVs are at high threat, they're threatened, we're proposing an active response. Is the most critical response, immediate response is required at the moment. It must be remembered that screening isn't a substitute for an assessment, and high risk areas can indicate where further work must be done. In high probability and low threat, these are the areas which are currently safe, and we want to prevent threats going into them. So we're suggesting a preventative response. In areas of medium risk, where there is low probability but high threat, there probably were residual HCVs, but they maybe warrant a prescriptive response. This is in areas which have long been degraded and managed potentially for agriculture and other uses. And prescriptive responses such as best agricultural management, avoiding peat, avoiding slopes, maintaining riparian belts, are probably sufficient to maintain any residual HCVs. And then you have the lowest risk, where there is very low probability and low threat. These areas may be useful, so because they're at low threat, may be ideal to target restoration in the future. This is the kind of the decision framework that we are proposing. Now, this needs to be tailored towards sectors, to regions, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to actually define what each of these responses should be. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of RIAO. Again, this is not complete all HCVs, but as you can see, the high risk are the areas in red. These would warrant a full assessment, potentially. The areas in green are those areas which are safe currently because they're at low threat, but they have very high probability of HCVs, and we want to keep them that way. How do we do that? What are the responses that are required? How do companies help conservation? And the medium is the second medium priority is areas which have already been lost, and potentially you don't need a full assessment. So you can do prescriptive responses, and the yellow is areas of potentially of restoration in the future. Next slide, please. And then the fourth stage that we're looking at is long-term monitoring. So how do you monitor HCVs on a landscape scale? We need to document where HCV is being done, how it's been done effectively, synthesize those lessons learned, and compile monitoring activities which are potentially useful for the future. This is further down the line and a lot more vague, to be honest. And we need to work out how we go through. So looking at the HCV approach, which is identification, management, and monitoring, this is kind of like a final stage. We need to start thinking about it, how to do it now. Next slide, please. Underlying this, so if we want to make claims, we have to have a strong quality assurance process. There are variable results from screening at the moment, and we need to iron out that variability. It could impact resources required for follow-up work if there's of variable quality. It could undermine credibility of labeling areas as low risk when it could potentially be at high risk. It could be variability. Variability could have far-reaching consequences, and so we need robust screening for this credible decision making. So that's something we really need to think about. We don't have the answers yet. Next. So yeah, just to recap, this is the landscape package. This is how we see it. Again, hopefully will be you can look at it in the shared slides. This is how we're thinking about things now. What we'd like to understand from stakeholders is what's required now. Next, please. If you want to read more about our work, you can screenshot this, or it'll be available in the shared materials, and you can click on these QR codes to find out more about our work. Landscapes is there in the middle. Next. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks a lot, Steph, and thanks a lot, everyone, for so many questions. And we see already on the chat, we've been trying to answer as many as possible via chat as well, but definitely we won't be able to get through them all. However, I think there is a lot of questions around how you do the social HCVs and how much you do. Tadia, can you go back to one slide? One more. Great, thanks. I guess that there's a lot of questions around how to do social ACVs, and I'm just wondering if we want to give a chance to Ellen and Stefan to respond to this question, like how do you do it? What kind of consultations do you do? What kind of communities that you talk to? Who would you like to start? Maybe Ellen, you start first on how you did this in Cameroon.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Leonie, and thank you for the people who asked the question. I think this is still a challenge, and from the guidance, this is something that is said. In our case, we tried again for the first step when we did the mapping. We were thinking, is it worth or not doing the HCV 5 and 6? As I said, HCV 6, we had actually already mapped from the community, from the municipality. So that was already easier to do, and we still went when we consulted. There was 19 communities, so we didn't went to the 19 of them, but we went to a couple of them, and we did ask to confirm where those areas still there. For the HCV 5, in this case, we used some proxies. We tried to see where did that make sense to use some of the community forests as areas that community were actually using, or information about water bodies that were probably, but this can also be put into ecosystem services. But then this is a limitation of our screening, and the idea is that integrating it into a wider context. So in this case, in the land use planning of the community, there are other consultations that will be done in the different villages, and in this moment we could actually go and really do participatory mapping to ask community members what are the areas that they're actually using. So yes, I think in that we didn't fully the HCV screening is limited in that sense for HCV 5 and 6, but it's still important to consider them in the wider context if it's in our case in a land use planning in the land use plan. Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot. And maybe Stefan will turn to you on what was the process to do checking on the social HCVs.
Yeah, first of all, we had the screening. Yeah, we already had the screening result, so which was a reference. And then, as I pointed out in the presentation, we have a long-standing presence with GIZ in KwaZulu, and we have a lot of staff that is actually local from KwaZulu, a long term. With this, based on the screening results, based also on local knowledge that we have, certain villages that are especially forest-dependent villages were selected. So, because I mean, there's I think 250 villages or something in KwaZulu, we were not able to do focus group discussion in each of every village in KwaZulu, but we did a selection for the most relevant ones, and they were conducted. Yeah. So that was on the ground level, and on the higher level, on the district level, as I mentioned in my presentation, there was like a socialization event. There was verification of the results and also public consultation.
Thanks, Stefan. And there was this one other question that's also interesting. I find that what's the reaction from the local government to the findings?
For KwaZulu, it is our study is just basically brand new. I mean, it just came out like 1 or 2 months ago. Yeah, and so what I presented in follow-up in the last slide is still ongoing, like to promote our results into this spatial planning, the review spatial plan is still ongoing. The expectation is that in February or March 2023, the decree about the spatial plan will be set. Yeah. So we still have a couple of months, and this process of trying to recognize our results into this decree is still ongoing. There is already focus group discussions and interviews with relevant decision makers and stakeholders ongoing, and so yeah, it's still ongoing process.
Great.
However, maybe I can point out one challenge is that, as I mentioned in the presentation, only 24% of KwaZulu are actually available for development, if you want to say, and the rest is off limits for the district government. So this is a large challenge, because if we now ask the provincial government, the district government, from this 24% that you have, you need to set aside, protect these HCV and HCS areas, you can expect that there is the reaction will be lukewarm, because I mean, yeah, it means even less area for them to be for development available. So this is a process of negotiation, and in essence, a very political process.
Great. We only have 6 more minutes, and for now, we really would like to ask your help to tell us, to tell the HCV network, what will be the most a useful tool that you need to optimize the application of HCV approach, we'll launch this poll. So the question is, what tools do you need to be able to optimize the application of the HCV approach at landscape scale? If you could, is it HCV screening priority maps for specific agricultural sectors? Is it HCV screening priority maps for specific regions? Is it decision frameworks or SOPs for actions needed in different priorities? Is it complementary guidance for filling landscape data gaps like social HCV data? Is it a quality assurance process for landscape HCV initiatives using screening, or monitoring framework for landscape scale HCVs? This will help HCV Network in particular, and also like supporters and members of HCV Network, to develop further guidance for the application of HCV approach at landscape scale. So we'll wait another minute. We have 33 people right now. Is HCV screening priority maps for specific regions, and the monitoring framework. It's the most popular ones. Nef, do you want to come in and just respond while it's still ongoing now, the poll?
Yes, I can't actually see it at the moment.
Oh, okay. So I'll end poll for now, just because we're running out of time, and so everybody can see it. Yes. Can you see it now?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So at the moment, there is HCVN, ZSL, WWF, and ProForests are discussing a coalition to produce screening priority maps, so that we reduce the potential replication and efforts. Again, we hope to tie this in with work with rubber and also oil palm, and also incorporate HCSA as well within that. Early days, we're just getting our organizations, how we align ourselves, so we've all got the same approach and ideas. But yeah, that's very interesting, and reinforces what we're already putting into place. And also, it's very interesting that monitoring frameworks for landscape scale HCVs is scoring high. That's something that we really do need to think about. I don't have the answers at the moment. We need to think about how to monitor HCVs over time and over such large scales. I don't have the answers about that. But if anybody would like to follow up with potential ideas, I think having another kind of webinar later on in next year will be interesting to revisit this.
Great, thanks a lot, Nef. I'll stop sharing the poll. And I just we're running out of time. It's a very technical discussion, but it is one that I think a lot of people will benefit and very much interested in. What we will do also, we will capture the questions that you ask here, and we will share them with the panelists so that they can also help respond via email. And I just would like to thank all of the speakers on behalf of the FA and HCV Network. So Nef, Ellen, and Stefan, thank you very much for sharing your expertise and insights. The FA team as well, with supporting Jack and Tario. And we want to thank also all of you for participating in this webinar and for all of the questions. We will share the recording of this webinar and really a long list of the resources shared here in the next few days. But you can also look at the Jurisdictional Approaches Resource Hub, which is a repository of anything and everything related to the use of landscape and jurisdictional approach to achieve sustainable land use. And please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any ideas, any topics, any lessons that you want to share that you think will benefit the Jurisdictional Action Network. And as this is like the, maybe for many people, almost the last day of workday, or maybe we won't see you until the next year. We wish you a great year-end holiday, and we'll see you next year. Thank you very much for your participation, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye bye.